Carol Burnett, one of television's greatest comedians, made millions laugh for more than a decade. But behind all that laughter was a story filled with pain, strength, and resilience that began long before she became famous. Born on April 26, 1933, in San Antonio, Texas, Carol's childhood was full of hardship. Her parents were both alcoholics who couldn't care for her properly. Her father worked in a movie theater but often lost his job because of his drinking. Her mother, who also drank heavily, was distant and emotionally unavailable. Both of them eventually died from alcohol-related illnesses, leaving Carol to grow up knowing what it felt like to be abandoned and unloved. When her parents gave up completely, her grandmother, Mabel White, took her in. In 1940, they moved from Texas to Hollywood in search of a better life, but things were far from glamorous. They lived in a small, run-down boarding house surrounded by other struggling people, addicts, the mentally ill, and those barely surviving on welfare. They lived on just $20 a week, barely enough for food. Still, Carol's grandmother gave her something she had never felt before: unconditional love. Even though they were poor, Carol finally felt safe. In that difficult environment, Carol developed her imagination as a way to escape. She invented an imaginary twin sister named Karen, confident, pretty, and outgoing, everything Carol felt she wasn't. She would change her clothes and hairstyle and pretend to be Karen so convincingly that even the adults in the boarding house believed she was real. It was her first real taste of acting, and even then, she had a natural gift for performing. Every Saturday, Carol and her grandmother would go to the movies. The tickets cost 25 cents, a big expense for them, but it was their favorite escape from reality. Inside the theater, Carol was mesmerized by the glamour, beauty, and magic on screen. For a few hours, she could forget about hunger and poverty. Sometimes, they didn't even have money for basic things like toilet paper, so they would quietly take some from the theater bathroom. Even as a little girl, Carol understood what it meant to be desperate, but she also learned what it meant to dream. One day, while watching a Tarzan movie, she heard Johnny Weissmuller's famous jungle yell echo through the theater. She loved it so much that she started practicing it at home until she could mimic it perfectly. That yell would later become one of her signature comedy moments in her shows, showing just how deeply her childhood experiences shaped her career. As she grew older, Carol dreamed of becoming a journalist. Her mother had once wanted to be a writer, and Carol felt like she could honor her by pursuing the same path. She wanted to go to UCLA, but when she applied, she didn't have the $50 needed for tuition. It seemed impossible until a mysterious stranger, whose name she never learned, paid the fee for her with no explanation. That act of kindness changed her life forever. At UCLA, Carol planned to study journalism, but when she took one theater class as an elective, everything changed. For the first time, she felt alive, confident, and truly herself. Her professors saw her potential immediately. She was funny, talented, and full of energy. She switched her major to theater and quickly became one of the best students in the program. At the end of her freshman year, she was named Most Promising Newcomer in the theater department, a title that gave her courage to keep going. A few years later, another miracle happened. At a party in San Diego, she met a wealthy man who offered to help her and her boyfriend, Don Soroyan, pursue their dreams. He gave them $1,000 each on 3 conditions. They could never reveal his name, they had to use the money only to get to New York, and if they ever made it, they had to help others in return. Carol accepted the offer, packed up her things, and left UCLA for New York in 1954. She didn't know anyone there and had never been that far from home, but she said later, "I didn't know enough to be scared." Life in New York was hard at first. The money started running out fast, and she almost gave up. But one day, she heard that a hurricane named Carol was coming up the coast, and she took it as a sign to stay strong. She soon found a place at the Rehearsal Club, a boarding house for young actresses. It wasn't fancy, just a small cot in a shared room with 4 other girls and 1 bathroom, but she was happy to be surrounded by people who had the same dreams. To survive, Carol worked as a hat check girl at night and auditioned during the day. In March 1955, she and the other girls put on a small show called the Rehearsal Club Review and sent invitations to agents and producers. Big names showed up, and from that night, everything started to change. Carol got noticed. Her first big break came when she performed a silly love song about John Foster Dulles, the U.S. Secretary of State. It was meant to be a joke, but her performance was so hilarious and charming that audiences loved it. She was invited to perform on The Jack Paar Show and The Ed Sullivan Show. On January 6, 1957, she performed on Sullivan's stage for the first time. By the end of her act, the audience was roaring with laughter. From there, her career took off. In 1959, she landed the lead role in Once Upon a Mattress, a comedy musical about a clumsy princess. The show became a hit and earned Carol her first Tony Award nomination. That same year, exactly 5 years after receiving the mysterious $1,000 loan, she and Don paid it back in full. The millionaire never revealed his identity, staying true to his word. Soon after, Carol joined The Gary Moore Show, where she became a household name. Her characters and sketches made people laugh every week, and she won her first Emmy Award in 1962. The show taught her everything about timing, performance, and live comedy. In 1962, she teamed up with Julie Andrews for a TV special called Julie and Carol at Carnegie Hall. CBS executives originally didn't think it would work, but it ended up being a massive hit, winning multiple awards and even releasing a best-selling soundtrack album. Then, in 1967, The Carol Burnett Show premiered on CBS, and television would never be the same. For 11 years straight, from 1967 to 1978, more than 30 million people tuned in each week to watch Carol and her cast perform live comedy sketches, sing, and entertain. The show became a national treasure, winning 25 Emmy Awards and earning a place among the greatest TV shows of all time. Carol broke barriers in an industry dominated by men. She became one of the first women to host her own variety show, opening doors for generations of female comedians who came after her. Her co-stars Harvey Korman, Tim Conway, and Vicki Lawrence became beloved figures too, and their chemistry was unmatched. But even with all the success, there were moments of tension behind the scenes. During one season, Harvey Korman got so upset that he told Carol he wasn't happy and slammed the door in her face. She fired him on the spot but rehired him after he apologized and promised to come to work skipping and whistling every morning. True to his word, he did exactly that the following Monday, and they stayed friends for years after. Tim Conway, on the other hand, brought chaos and laughter to the show by never rehearsing his best jokes until the live taping. This made every performance unpredictable and real. One of the most famous moments came during a sketch about an elephant, where Conway told a ridiculous story that made everyone, including Carol, break character and burst into uncontrollable laughter. For 11 years, Carol's show gave people joy, laughter, and a break from their everyday struggles. It became one of the most beloved programs in TV history. But there was one episode she never watched again. It was a sketch that mirrored her own painful childhood so closely that it made her cry. She said it felt too real, too personal. Behind her comedy was always a layer of truth. Carol used laughter as armor, turning pain into something beautiful that could heal others. Her journey from a poor, abandoned girl in Texas to one of the most powerful women in entertainment wasn't easy, but it showed what courage, heart, and humor can do. To this day, Carol Burnett is remembered not only for her unmatched comedy but for her resilience. She taught the world that even through heartbreak, laughter can be a form of strength, and sometimes, the best way to survive is to smile through the tears. In 1977, something happened that deeply affected Carol Burnett. It came from one of the recurring sketches on her show, The Family. In it, she played Eunice Higgins, a woman weighed down by disappointment and broken dreams. Normally, this sketch mixed humor and dysfunction, showing a family that fought and bickered in funny ways. But this time, they took a big risk. There were no jokes, no over-the-top reactions, just raw emotion and pain. The episode was called The Gong Show. In the story, Eunice believed that if she performed on a talent show and sang her heart out, she would finally achieve the fame she always dreamed of. But instead of success, the judges mocked her cruelly. One of those judges was played by real-life game show host Alan Ludden. Carol Burnett didn't play it for laughs this time. She dropped the funny accent, the wild movements, and just acted truthfully. By the time the scene ended, the entire crew on set was holding back tears. When the episode finally aired, it hit audiences just as hard. The camera slowly pulled back on Eunice's tear-streaked face as the lights dimmed. There was no music, no laughter, only silence and heartbreak. Viewers were stunned. Critics praised the episode for its honesty, but Carol herself never watched it again. Years later, in a 2010 interview, she said it felt too real. "Eunice's pain felt like my own," she said. And that was because it truly was. Carol Burnett had grown up in poverty. She knew what it was like to dream big and be laughed at. That sketch, in many ways, was her story too. In an interview with Harper's Bazaar, she later said, "I'm glad we did it, but it wasn't what our show was about. We were there to make people forget their troubles, not remind them." Even so, the episode left a permanent mark on television history. It even led to a TV movie in 1982 called Eunice and a spin-off sitcom, Mama's Family. Carol eventually left the sitcom because she wasn't happy with its direction, but the original sketch remained legendary. Carol Burnett wasn't just a woman who made the world laugh. Behind the laughter, her own life was filled with heartbreak, chaos, and family struggles that would have broken most people. Her story began back in college when she met her first husband, Don Soroyan. They were both young, full of dreams, and eager to make it big in show business. Don was born in Omaha, Nebraska, in 1928 and had big ambitions for Broadway. The two met while studying at UCLA in 1952 and married 3 years later, in 1955. For a while, everything seemed perfect. They supported each other's dreams, but tragedy soon followed. Don had a daughter from a previous relationship, and when she passed away, it broke something inside him. Around the same time, Carol's career began to rise quickly while Don started to stall. The imbalance, along with the emotional weight of his loss, caused their marriage to fall apart. On Christmas Day in 1959, they separated, and by 1962, they divorced. Don struggled with depression and alcoholism for the rest of his life and passed away in 1990 at the age of 62. He never achieved the Broadway fame he once hoped for. Carol found love again not long after. She met television producer Joe Hamilton, who already had 8 children from his previous marriage. Joe was a talented producer who had even helped organize Carol's Carnegie Hall concert in 1962. They got married in 1963 and soon began working together on The Carol Burnett Show. They had 3 daughters together, Carrie, Jody, and Erin, and also suffered a miscarriage in 1965. With Joe's 8 children and their 3, the house was always full. Joe's career thrived alongside Carol's. He even won 5 Emmy Awards for producing her show. But while their professional lives were a success, their personal lives began to crack under pressure. Then came one of the biggest public battles of Carol's career. In 1976, the National Enquirer published a false story claiming she had been drunk in a restaurant while sitting near Henry Kissinger. For Carol, this was a painful accusation, not just because it wasn't true but because she had long spoken out against alcoholism and had seen what it could do to families. She decided to fight back. Carol sued the tabloid for $1.6 million, determined to clear her name. The case dragged on for 5 long years and exposed just how reckless some tabloids could be. During the trial, it was revealed that a paid informant had told the Enquirer that Carol hadn't been drunk, but they published the story anyway. Eventually, she won the case, but after appeals, it was settled for about $200,000. For Carol, it was never about the money, it was about truth, dignity, and setting a standard for fairness in journalism. Her victory changed the way tabloids handled celebrity stories forever. But her biggest battle wasn't fought in a courtroom, it was fought at home. In the late 1970s, Carol's daughter Carrie fell deeply into drug addiction. She was only 13 when she began experimenting with cocaine, marijuana, mushrooms, and quaaludes. Carey later said she used drugs because she wanted to stop being Carol Burnett's daughter and just be herself. From 1976 to 1979, Carol watched her child slip away. She sent her to multiple rehab programs, each time hoping it would work. At one point, Carey even ran away from a rehab center in Texas. Carol was terrified she might lose her daughter forever. Eventually, at age 17, Carey got sober, but it wasn't easy. Carol had to make the painful decision to enforce strict boundaries that made Carey resent her. For over a year, they didn't speak. Carol once said, "You have to love them enough to let them hate you." But she never stopped believing in her daughter. When Carey finally came back, they rebuilt their bond stronger than ever. Carey went on to prove her own talent, landing a role in the TV series Fame and even writing and acting alongside her mother. Together, they co-wrote a play called Hollywood Arms, based on Carol's own life story. They were inseparable until tragedy struck again. In 2002, Carey died from pneumonia caused by lung cancer that had spread to her brain. She was only 38 years old. She never got to see Hollywood Arms premiere on stage. Carol was devastated, but she finished the project anyway, saying, "I owed it to Carey." By then, Carol's second marriage to Joe Hamilton had already ended. They divorced in 1984 after years of emotional strain, professional stress, and the challenges of dealing with Carey's addiction. Their two younger daughters had even been sent to live in Hawaii so they wouldn't have to witness their parents' painful breakup. Joe remained part of the family until he passed away from cancer in 1991. Even after two marriages and enormous heartbreak, Carol still found love once more. In the late 1990s, while performing in Long Beach, she met Brian Miller, a kind and talented musician who was 23 years younger than her. Age didn't matter, they connected instantly. They got married in 2001 when Carol was 68 and Brian was 45. Just 2 months later, Carey passed away, leaving Carol broken again. Brian became her strength. He helped her survive the darkest period of her life and encouraged her to finish Hollywood Arms. They've been together ever since, their love steady and supportive. In 2020, Carol and Brian faced another family crisis. Her youngest daughter, Erin, had struggled with addiction for nearly 2 decades and could no longer care for her son, Dylan. Carol and Brian stepped in to protect him. Erin had been in rehab 8 times and spent nearly 240 days in institutions. Things reached a breaking point when police had to intervene after Erin sent suicidal messages to her children. Carol filed for legal guardianship of Dylan soon after, and the court granted her and Brian temporary custody. Once again, Carol did what she had always done, protect her family, no matter how painful it was. Even in her later years, Carol Burnett continued to amaze audiences. At 89, she appeared in the final season of Better Call Saul. She played Marion, a kind but clever elderly woman who slowly discovered the truth about Saul Goodman. In one unforgettable scene, she quietly confronted Saul, realizing who he really was. Her trembling voice and calm determination made the moment incredibly tense. Vince Gilligan, the show's creator, later said that writing a scene where Saul even considered hurting her character felt awful because Carol Burnett was such an American treasure. When her character pressed her life alert button and turned Saul in, it became one of the most talked about scenes in the show's history. This wasn't the first time she had stunned people with her acting. Back in the 1990s, she appeared in the hit sitcom Mad About You as Teresa, a role that showed off her subtle humor and emotional depth. In 1997, she won the Emmy Award for Outstanding Guest Actress in a Comedy Series. Critics loved how natural and real she was, proving she wasn't just a variety show comedian but a serious actress. She also won the American Comedy Award 2 years in a row for that same role. Throughout her career, Carol Burnett earned an incredible 25 Emmy nominations. As time went on, her voice became her strongest tool. In the 2000s, she lent her voice to animated films, bringing her charm and wit to a whole new generation. One of her biggest hits was Horton Hears a Who. In 2008, where she starred alongside Jim Carrey and Steve Carell. The film earned nearly $300 million worldwide. In 2001, she had voiced Mrs. Hammerbotham in The Trumpet of the Swan, working with Reese Witherspoon and Jason Alexander. Her warm, expressive voice helped introduce her talent to children who had never even seen The Carol Burnett Show. Carol also returned to Broadway at the end of the 1990s, starring in Stephen Sondheim's Putting It Together. The musical opened at the Ethel Barrymore Theatre in November 1999 and ran for over 100 performances. It had been 30 years since her last Broadway role, but when she stepped on stage, it was as if she had never left. Even when her skirt accidentally fell during a performance, she turned it into a hilarious improvisation, proof of her natural stage magic. Critics praised her ability to blend humor and vulnerability effortlessly. And just when people thought she had done everything, Carol surprised the world again in 2024 with her role in Palm Royale on Apple TV+. She played Norma Delacourt, a wealthy woman who spent most of the series in a coma until suddenly waking up. Carol brought the character to life with humor and improvisation, even making up her dialogue to mimic someone just learning to speak again. At 91 years old, she became the oldest woman ever nominated for an Emmy for Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Comedy Series. The show itself earned 11 nominations and featured stars like Kristen Wiig, Ricky Martin, Laura Dern, and Allison Janney, but Carol still stood out. After more than 70 years in show business, Carol Burnett continues to inspire the world with her talent, strength, and heart. She made generations laugh, cry, and believe that even in pain, humor can heal. Her story is not just one of fame, it's one of resilience, love, and courage that still shines bright today.